Makes Me Want to Holler by Nathan McCall. Chapter 42, The Big Time. On a hot summer day in 1989, reporters crowded into the conference room at City Hall and jostled with photographers and television cameramen competing for choice spots. The reporters, acting like one big inquisitive family, gossiped while they waited for the mayor to appear. He was already late. No big deal. He was always late. But this was Washington, D.C., not Atlanta, and I was feeling a little nervous as I sat near an aisle toward the front of the room. Everybody else there seemed to know their way around City Hall. They knew what buttons to push for news tips and where to find information they needed. I would have to watch and learn. Suddenly, there was a rumbling near the door. Reporters rushed to their places and readied their cameras and pens. The mayor was coming. In walked Marion Barry, tall, dark, confident, and dressed to a T. He sported a dark, tapered, pinstripe suit coordinated perfectly with a heavily starched shirt, a matching tie with a gold tie pin, and dark floor seams, the kind the hustlers wear on the black side of town. Surrounded by an entourage of security men and assistants, Barry stepped coolly through the doorway, paused for a second to straighten his tie, then scanned the gathering and stepped to a podium before 100 microphones. Like soldiers, reporters snapped to attention and immediately began hurling questions and sparring with one of the most controversial, charismatic local politicians in the country. By the summer of 1989, the media had already begun doing stories about Barry's rumored drug use and womanizing. That made him the hottest news topic in the nation's capital. I found it inconceivable that such rumors could be true. How could the mayor of one of the most highly visible cities in the whole wide world be so stupid? How could a person who was a folk hero to local blacks, who went around the city schools urging young children to just say no to drugs, be so boldly hypocritical? No way, I thought. During the press conference, reporters almost lunged at the mayor with questions about his behavior. Barry looked directly into the television cameras and told the world that he had never used drugs a day in his life. In fact, he said, he abhorred drug use and was committed to fighting the scourge of drugs tearing apart black communities in Washington and across the nation. As arrogant and cagey as any politician, Barry answered those questions he wanted to address and refused to answer those he didn't like. He weathered the scrutiny like a pro and seemed to relish sparring with reporters he knew by name. I sat there quietly, fascinated by this intelligent man who was haunted by self-destructive tendencies and irresistibly drawn to the streets. After several minutes of addressing more mundane questions about the city budget, Barry abruptly ended the circus, leaving reporters hanging with many unanswered questions. Before leaving, the mayor walked down the aisle through the throng of reporters, speaking to some and joking with others while straightening his tie and primping in his tailored suit. When he reached the spot where I sat, he stopped, looked me up and down and said, "What's your name?" I took that inquiry to mean that if he didn't notice every reporter in the City Hall press pool, he certainly noticed every black face in the bunch. "I'm Nathan McCall." "Who you with?" "I'm with the Washington Post. I'm going to be covering the city council." Barry said, "Where you from?" "I came here from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution." He nodded. "Atlanta, huh?" "Yeah." Pause. He gave me a hearty slap on the shoulder, grinned broadly, and said, "Welcome to the big time." Then he strutted off. Indeed, I had finally reached the big time. Washington, D.C., the capital of the so-called free world. The president of the USA lived in and operated from this city. The White House was just a few blocks up from City Hall. Less than a mile away, the U.S. Capitol sat majestically at the end of the mall. Washington was one of the most beautiful cities I'd ever seen. Electric, pulsating with its bustling traffic and historic government buildings, its sidewalk cafes and basement bars, its brownstone row houses and trendy high-rises. Riding through the streets, I remember how I used to go to Washington with my classmates on field trips in junior high. We save our money for months, then take the 4-hour ride on chartered buses and tour the museums and historic monuments. I never thought I'd be living there. I rented a 7th-floor apartment in the southwest section of the town near the waterfront. The apartment had a splendid view of the Capitol. It was within walking distance of the mall, all the famous monuments, and the Smithsonian museums. It was not far from work, and it was close to theaters and good seafood restaurants. It felt good being farther up north. I knew I had left the deep south when I stopped seeing leather-faced white men in red man caps and flannel shirts driving pickup trucks with rifle racks. I hoped that something I heard all my life would prove true, that the racial dynamics were better farther north. Certainly, I didn't feel the open hostility in D.C. that had kept me on edge in the deep south. At a glance, it seemed to me that whites in D.C. were a more sophisticated, better educated bunch. I figured the racial tolerance would be higher there because D.C. attracted people of diverse cultures and nationalities from all over the world. Still, there were early indications that my hope to escape the burdens of race was asking for too much. When I saw black elementary school aged kids standing on corners with Windex and washcloths, begging motorists to let them clean their windshield for coins, when I saw white people at stoplights roll up their car windows at the sight of homeless black beggars, then hand dollar bills to homeless whites, I got my personal initiation into DC's own brand of racism when white workers in stores and restaurants went all out to please white patrons but dragged ass on me. When taxi drivers routinely passed me by, then stopped to pick up whites standing a few feet away. Finally, I was forced to acknowledge the thing that I'd often heard other blacks say, that it doesn't matter whether it's north or south, racism afflicts the whole of the US of A. DC has a larger, more entrenched black middle class than Atlanta. On the positive side, these blacks seem more assertive and politically astute. On the other hand, they are illustrations of a widely held view of middle-class blacks everywhere. In spite of all their money, skills, and potential, they're one of the most confused, alienated groups in the land. Middle-class blacks in D.C. are some of the most bourgeois, pretentious, snooty black folks I've seen anywhere. Some act like they are 4th and 5th generation aristocrats. I got my fill of that pretentiousness one night when, in the effort to meet more people, I went to a meeting of a black ski club. Everybody there was boasting about their world travels. Oh, honey, I just got back from Barbados. I had a wonderful time. Oh, I need a vacation, child. I was thinking about doing Aruba next month. I'm so tired. I went to South America on business for a few weeks and I just got back. I need a break. They fronted hard, but I guess that half of them were probably one paycheck away from being exposed. I felt like standing up and saying, look, we're all descendants of slaves, so let's cut this pompous shit. After listening to them tell lies and put on airs for half an hour, I left and never went back. Anytime I want to get in touch with real black people in the city and take the pulse of street life there, I scope out a funky barbershop in a serious working class neighborhood. I found the perfect spot in Northwest Washington. Half the barbers, I was sure, had taken up their trade during prison stints. They had a cocky penitentiary mannerisms that I recognized from Southampton, as well as that rock-hard musculature from pumping iron. They wore their hats while cutting hair and talked as loud and crazy as their customers. There was a constant stream of brothers and sisters in and out of this place, and a lot of them didn't come in for haircuts. Some of the cats who came through there were small-time hustlers and druggies who stopped in and offered good deals on shoes, shirts, jackets, whatever they stolen that day. Others went straight to the back of the shop where the owner took a cut on card and crap games held in a smoky room. My barber was an old head in his early 50s, known around the neighborhood for being quick-tempered and hip. He kept a pistol in his drawer and a fifth of scotch, which he nursed constantly in a paper cup. I learned to get in his chair before Friday evening when he was juiced up and his clippers were unsteady. I'd go in there some Fridays and he'd already be dressed to go out on the town after the last head was cut. He'd have on a wide brim hat and a bright red shirt with a butterfly collar open wide so you could see his rope-sized gold chain. He'd also be wearing a pair of pants that matched his double knit jacket, which looked like the upper half of a walking suit. If you told him he wasn't clean, he'd probably shoot you with the piece he kept stashed away. I liked that shop because I could always get a good bet on the latest boxing match, pick up on the latest street slang, or get a line on the working class view of politics in D.C. Going there was a bit like hanging out at the 7-Eleven at home without being exposed to the risk. Sometimes I repeatedly forego my turn in the chair while trying not to be so obvious about the fact that I just wanted to extend my stay. Going from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution to the Washington Post was like going from college football to the pros. It seemed that practically everybody in the Post newsroom was a pro at what he did. I spent my first few weeks at the Post in disbelief. I knew that I'd gotten there by my own doing, yet there was a kind of shock that I had actually pulled it off. The first day I walked into the newsroom and went to my assigned desk, there was a nameplate already there. It read simply, Nathan McCall. I stared at the name as though detached from it, then let these words roll softly off my tongue. Nathan McCall at the Washington Post. Almost every morning I'd enter the Post building on 15th Street and wonder at the fact that I was entering a historic institution, a place where reporters were so good they had actually brought down the President of the United States. And here I was, an ex-con, a former armed robber, working among them. That irony made me dizzy. It seemed like another installment in the big, continuous dream. I spent a lot of time gawking, like a young stargazer, at all the legends I had read about. Ben Bradley brought through the newsroom, sporting his starched two-tone shirts and matching ties. Catherine Graham, the owner of the paper, drifted through from time to time. Once I went to an in-house workshop on investigative reporting led by Bob Woodward, one of the two reporters who had broken the Watergate story. Although I was awestruck, I constantly reminded myself that I was there because I, too, had something on the ball. I thought, I deserve to be here as much as anyone in this room. Still, the Post felt like a strange and alien world to me. Many of the people there, I learned, were silver spoonish, trust fund babies raised and educated in the insulated Ivy League. They were smart, but in a narrow, elitist way. They could expound at length about all kinds of esoterica, and they knew all there was to know about the intricacies of politics and people around the world. Yet they seemed to know nothing about blacks in the city where they lived and worked, or about those African Americans sitting in the newsroom next to them. I hadn't been at the paper more than a week when I spotted Tom Littman, the guy who had implied a few years earlier at the Missouri seminar that the Post had a hard time finding minorities because so many of them had criminal records. As soon as I saw him, I wanted to rush over and say, "See, even guys with criminal records can do okay, if given a chance." When he saw me, he averted his eyes, but I made it a point to go over and say hello. As we chatted, I wondered what he thought of my being there. I could tell he was uncomfortable, and I enjoyed the torture. I knew he'd be uneasy every time he saw me, and I wanted it to stay that way. I was part of a 3-member team of reporters assembled to cover City Hall and prepare for an upcoming election in which Mayor Berry was expected to receive several strong challenges. I was assigned to cover the D.C. City Council. Another reporter, Rob Melton, covered the mayor. A third reporter, Michael Amberwitz, was sort of the general assignment reporter on the team. Our editor, Eric Pianin, would coordinate the coverage. Our team, I learned, was put together to kill the competition. I relished the challenge of learning a new city and figuring out the nuances of its politics, and I had no trouble figuring out the lay of the land at City Hall. But I discovered that it was not so easy dealing with my own newsroom, starting with Pianin, my editor. Soon after I arrived, I had trouble transmitting the story through the Post computer system. Pianin said over the phone, "Nathan, deadline is near. Just send the story." I didn't like the tone of his voice. Such impatience seemed unreasonable during my first few days on the job. I swallowed hard and remained calm. But the following day, when I went into the newsroom, I walked over to Pianin and told him I'd like to speak with him. We went downstairs to the cafeteria for a cup of coffee and talked. I said, "I wanted to talk because it upset me a little when you raised your voice at me. I was wondering if there was something we needed to talk about so that it doesn't happen again." He explained the computer system and deadlines. "Fine, no problem. Cool. Not a great start, but that's okay." I saw where I stood and what I faced with him. Pianin was a white guy from the Midwest. From the start, something about him had set off alarms. Some white people are whiter than others. They were raised in insulated, exclusively white settings and have had little exposure to anything else. They have a worldview that sees whiteness as the standard and everything else is abnormal. I could spot such people in the stadium crowd. I could feel their overwhelming whiteness in my interactions with them. Pianin was that sort of guy. In one of my first conversations with Pianin, when I got to the Post, I asked him if other reporters knew about my prison record. He said yes, and added that some had complained about the Post having hired an ex-con. I wonder if he was one of the complainers. I wonder even more when we started working together. I sensed his impatience with me, which contrasted sharply with how he treated Amberwitz. I knew what that was about. Smart-ass white boys. They think they're the only ones who can do the job, and anyone else who comes in and tries gets the cold shoulder. The white boy double bank. Consequently, every time I made a mistake, Pianin seemed to take it personally. Every time Amberwitz made a mistake, though, it was, well, he's a young go-getter. Seeing all that, I thought, it never ends. You always have to fight them with your hands tied behind your back. My relationship with my team partners was no more promising. Melton was a tall, mysterious white boy with a semi-pompous air. He was an excellent reporter, but his personality was as changeable as the wind. Not the kind of guy you go out for drinks or slap shoulders with. We seldom talk. Amberwitz was a 24-year-old upstart trying to win a permanent spot on the political team. He reminded me of a bouncy but frumpy puppy. He was friendly but conspiratorial. He did a lot of whispering with Melton and Pianin. I noticed right off that he monitored my stories closely, as if he were keeping tabs on me. It didn't take long for Amberwitz and me to butt heads. I noticed that whenever Melton and Amberwitz worked together on stories, Amberwitz fed information to Melton, who did the writing. But whenever Amberwitz and I worked together, there was a power struggle to see who would write the story. It was an irritating reminder of something I learned long ago. No matter how old or experienced you get, white boys are always going to assume that they're better and know more, even if they're right out of college, like Amberwitz was. The first few times I felt tension from Amberwitz, I let him be the lead writer, to see if he'd extend the courtesy the next time around. Nothing doing. As long as I was willing to let him take the lead, he took it. He also tried to undermine me on stories. Whenever he was called upon to feed information to me, he didn't seem to hustle to get me the best quotes. When he fed info to Milton, he worked like a slave. After several months of taking this, I went to Pianin and talked with him about Amberwitz's being uncooperative. Pianin shrugged it off. He's young and competitive, he said. The atmosphere at the Post was fraught with competition that was so intense that there were always sparks flying everywhere. Whites, who understood and willingly played the game, seemed to have no problem elbowing and cutthroating to get their way. Like many blacks, though, I took conflicts personally and spent a lot of time trying to figure out what they meant. I wondered if Amberwitz was racist, merely competitive, or both. This whole situation brought home a problem that remains a constant source of irritation to me. Race relations in this country have become so complex and convoluted that it's hard nowadays to tell in interactions with whites what's racial and what's not. When problems persisted, I went to the city editor and talked with her about it. Her response was similar to PNN's. She said, "Oh, he's just a little insecure." It pissed me off seeing everybody make excuses for the white boy. Nobody makes allowances for black folks anywhere. Having done my part in trying to address these concerns, I called Amberwitz, looked him in the eye, and outlined the problems I had with him. He apologized and we went our separate ways. One day, not long afterward, Amberwitz and I were working on a story together. I completed my reporting and waited on him. Rather than pass along his information so that I could begin writing, he withheld it and busied himself with other things. I told him, "Mike, send me the info." He stalled again. "All right," he said. "I got a few more things to gather." I left work that day furious. The deadline was nearing, and we hadn't even started writing. The following morning, a Saturday, I was already at the office, waiting when Amberwitz arrived. I had decided it was time to talk. This time seriously. I had played by the rules and been ignored. I had heard all the excuses I wanted to hear. I said, "Mike, I need to talk to you." We sat down. I got very close to him, glared into his eyes and said, "I want to know what your problem is." He looked sheepish. "There's no problem," he said. "Yes, there is. I noticed that when you work with Milton, there are no conflicts, but every time you work with me, there are problems. That suggests to me that you've got a problem with me, and I want to know what it is." I was mad as hell. I scooted even closer and put my finger in his face. "Now, I've asked you twice about this. I'm not going to ask you again. The next time you try to undermine me on the story, I'm going to fuck you up. You understand?" He nodded like a scolded child. Then his eyes moistened and tears began running down his cheeks, right there in the newsroom. Just then, Pianin walked in. He came over to where we were sitting and asked, "Is the story ready?" I said nothing. Amberwitz hung his head. Pianin looked at Amberwitz, then at me, then walked away and went to his desk. A minute later, Amberwitz's phone rang. He picked it up and began talking softly. I looked across the room at Pianin and saw that he too was on the phone. Amberwitz hung up and went directly to Pianin's desk, where they talked some more. I felt like I was in a boxing ring, being double banked by my opponent and the referee. Somehow we finished the story. I don't even recall what it was about. After that incident, I realized what was up with my editor and the rest of the team, and I accepted the relationships for what they were. I realized that they weren't going to kill the competition after all. The competition was me. I was at home the night Mayor Marion Barry was taped on camera and busted for smoking crack at the Vista Hotel. Somebody from the newsroom called and told me. I felt a mixture of emotions. Mostly, I was shocked that he could be so stupid. He had to know that the FBI and the media, particularly the Post, were watching him closely in light of the rumors about his drug abuse. I concluded that if Barry allowed himself to be snared, knowing he was being watched, then in all likelihood, he lost control of himself and really did have a drug problem. Barry's arrest affected me like many other disappointments involving blacks. Every time somebody black did some highly publicized evil or stupid thing, I cringed because I knew that in white folks' eyes, it reflected badly on the whole race. Every time I heard news accounts about some drug bust, carjacking, robbery, or rape, I close my eyes and think, I hope it wasn't a black person who did it. No matter how hard I fought, it was always there. That tendency to see us through the accusing eyes of whites. After Barry was caught, I saw indications that other blacks at the post were also hypersensitive about our racial image. Some blacks in the newsroom got seriously uptight when they saw whites celebrating Barry's downfall with obvious glee. My domestic problems didn't end when I moved to Washington. In fact, they seemed to get worse. I went back and forth to court in Atlanta so much that it felt sometimes like I had never left. When several months passed without seeing my children, I got some time off, called Debbie, and arranged to visit them. When I reached town, I telephoned her and let her know what time I'd pick up the kids. I was excited at the prospect of seeing Ian and Maya, who were then 7 and 5 years old. I planned to take them out for ice cream, and I thought about all I wanted to talk with them about. Driving onto the street near the house, I passed a policeman who appeared to be patrolling the neighborhood. I pulled up to my old house, parked, and rang the doorbell. Strangely, the house was dark. I had talked to Debbie less than an hour before. Then I heard footsteps behind me and turned around. A policeman, the same one I passed moments earlier, rushed across the yard, clutching his revolver. He yelled, "Freeze! Don't move!" I stood there wondering what the hell was going on. The cop said, "Put your hands against the wall." I said, "What's the problem?" "Just do as I say and be quiet." I turned, raised my hands high, and spread my legs. He reached into my back pocket, took out my wallet, then slapped on handcuffs and led me to the patrol car. When he shoved me into the back seat, that old familiar feeling came over me. I glanced at the mesh wire shield between the front and rear seats and felt once again the pain of trying to balance myself with my hands cuffed behind me. I was sure it was all some mistake. Maybe, I thought, the lawman took me to be a prowler. It would be straightened out as soon as Debbie came out and told him she was expecting me. But she never showed. I glanced up at the house and spotted the shadow peeping through parted curtains in the living room. I asked the cop, "Can you tell me what this is about?" "There's been a felony warrant issued for your arrest." I couldn't believe it. A warrant? For what? Non-payment of child support and abandonment. I almost shouted, "I haven't abandoned anybody. I'm legally divorced." The cop shrugged. All he knew, he said, was that the warrant was taken out by my ex-wife. Then everything crystallized. Debbie set me up to go to jail. I thought, damn, I couldn't believe she'd go this far. But then, why shouldn't I believe it after all she's done? True, I fallen behind on my $1,200 a month combined child support and mortgage payment, but I had gotten loans from my parents and put my car up for sale to try to catch up. I tried to get anyone in the court system to understand that I was doing my best to comply with the law, but no one cared. When I told my attorney I was constantly falling behind, he looked at me, shrugged, and asked for another payment on the amount I owed him. Every time I tried to catch up on my payments to him, I fell further behind on my payments to Debbie and vice versa. I couldn't return to court to have the child support order modified. That would cost thousands more in legal fees. And my financial problems were compounded because D.C. is a much more expensive place to live than Atlanta. The system, instead of resolving problems, it created more. I was trying my damnedest to play by the rules, but too often the rules made no sense to me. Thinking about all that while sitting in the cop car, I slumped in my seat, refusing to accept what was happening to me. Before taking me in, the lawman made one more stop. He drove to a remote building and picked up another man who was being detained by a second cop. The man, a tall black guy with handcuffs on, was shoved into the back seat beside me. We exchanged knowing glances and remained quiet. We got to the Fulton County Jail Complex, where we were taken through electronic gates and ushered into a bullpen. I flopped down on one of the 3 steel benches lining the concrete wall. The tall guy, who appeared to be in his late 40s, stretched out on the bench across the room. There was one other inmate already there. Each of us chilled on his own bench and stared emptily into space. I wondered again why this was happening to me. It must be my karma. It must be God's way of repaying me for all the brutal stuff I've done to other people. It had been 12 years since I'd been in jail. I'd always feared some strange freak incident would bring me back. As the years had passed, I'd begun to think I might be one of the lucky few who beat the odds and never returned. But the cycle of prison had caught up with me. The only difference between me and all the others I knew who had gone back to prison was that I fought harder and lasted longer than most of them. I thought about the implications of my arrest. The Journal-Constitution, I was sure, would pick up on it. Maybe even my bosses at the Washington Post would find out. I could hear the newsroom gossip. Did you hear the guy with the criminal record got arrested again? I doubted my bosses would be so forgiving this time. At that moment, it seemed irrelevant whether or not the charges against me would stick. I was going to return to prison anyway. I made up my mind right then and there that I was going to murder my ex-wife. I was fed up with her hassling me. I thought, now it's my turn to retaliate. During the allotted telephone call, I called my homeboy Claxton, who set about the task of contacting my parents and trying to raise bail. When I returned to the cell block, a fourth guy had been added to our den. He was a friendly, chatty, toothless dude who clearly was no stranger to the place. The guards came and passed out ugly, dry bologna sandwiches. I gave mine away. The guy who had been the first in the cell block, a younger man, went and stood over Mr. Friendly. "What if I take one of those sandwiches from you?" Mr. Friendly said, "Nah, man, you can't have my sandwich." Youngblood said, "I'll take that shit," then hauled off and punched Mr. Friendly in the face. Whack! I propped one foot on the bench and watched nonchalantly and considered the silliness of two fools coming to blows over a stale bologna sandwich. The guy who had ridden to jail with me stretched out and watched also. Neither of us moved to break up the fight. The two guys punched and wrestled in the center of the cell block. Then Mr. Friendly shot Youngblood's cuffs. He lifted him off the ground and slammed him into the steel bench with such force that I thought he'd broken the young guy's back. He pinned him between the bench and the floor and punched his face rapid fire, and two guards, alerted by the ruckus, rushed into the cell block and tore them apart. Mr. Friendly explained how the fight got started. Youngblood stood there, silent and no doubt embarrassed to have lost the rumble he had started. He was removed from the cell block. The brawl was a quick reminder to me that I was back in the jungle. I would have to dust off some old instincts and play it by ear. The jailers finished processing us around 3 a.m. Then it was time for us to get bedded down for the night. A group of us was herded to a shower area and ordered to strip naked. One guard lined up along a wall while another sprayed our pubic hair and underarms with stuff that looked and smelled like insecticide. They were spraying for lice. Afterward, we were issued ill-fitting uniforms and taken to cells. I don't recall how I slept that night or whether I slept at all. All I remember is the muddy, tasteless food served for breakfast the next morning and the horrible feeling of being confined. The feeling that I had lost control of my life again. Later in the day, I was taken along with other new arrivals to a dormitory cell block. The Fulton County Jail was so overcrowded that there weren't enough beds to go around. Inmates slept on the walkways of tiers. It was a familiar scene that brought back memories of the Norfolk Jail. Brothers huddled around a picnic table, playing cards and talking trash. Others watching television or lying lazily on their bunks. I scanned the room and thought about how every jail seemed to sound, smell, and look the same. Bars, concrete, and shiny floors. All eyes fixed on me and a few other newcomers. I felt a perverted comfort in knowing I was an old pro at doing time. I felt none of the jitters that first-timers feel. I staked out a spot on the floor, threw my mattress down against the wall. After getting settled, I ventured into the day room and spotted a chess match in progress. I asked, "Who's up next?" One of the players looked up from the board and said, "Nobody." "I'm next," I said. When my turn came around, I sat down, got engrossed in the game, and momentarily forgot about my cares. By midday, I felt like an inmate again. I pinpointed the thinkers in the cell block and chatted with them about my case, about their cases, about rules and procedures governing such important matters as use of the jail canteen. When lunchtime rolled around, the food tasted so bad that it inspired me to fast. I used my food to barter for toothpaste and other necessities. My cornbread got me a new toothbrush. For a carton of milk, I got a ballpoint pen. A piece of chicken brought me a legal pad, and so on. After bartering through 3 meals, I had nearly everything I needed, including a few luxury items such as a comb and a brush. I spent that second night in jail fantasizing about killing Debbie. Maybe I could pay somebody to cancel her out. A single gunshot to the head would do. The next day, I made phone calls to my homeboys, to my mother, to anybody who could help me raise the $2,000 needed to get me out. I played chess, read, fasted, and pondered life. By the third day, the spirit of the fast had kicked in. It had been a long while since I had fasted. Getting in touch with my spirit again helped me regain perspective. As I moved about the cell block and learned the terrible circumstances most other inmates faced, my own troubles seemed less severe. Some of those dudes faced serious charges that would get them big time. Others had been in jail for months because they were too poor to make $100 bail. I realized that no matter what happened to me, I could bounce back if I drew again on my inner reserves. I was released early on the morning of the 4th day. My parents and friends scraped up the money to get me out. By then, I had abandoned all those crazy thoughts about killing my ex-wife. The spiritual fast had helped me see something that I had lost sight of. Human beings are far too complex to be labeled completely good or totally bad. Debbie was a good mother to my children. She was angry at me and definitely vengeful, but not a bad person by any stretch of the imagination. When the guard came to the cell block and called my name, I left my belongings for inmates to split, bid farewell to my chess partners, and wished them all well. I strolled outdoors and thanked the Creator. Once again, I was free. All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 42. And first of all, I want to say thank you guys for tuning in. I always appreciate you coming and listening to this story with me. One of the first things that always comes to mind when reading this book is, life is always going to come with problems. Like, you can't avoid it. This latest problem that he faced with his ex-wife having him sent to jail is something that I know a lot of brothers have gone through. And, seeing those stories, seeing what men have gone through with having baby mamas and just all of that drama, that helped inspire me to not have children until I was absolutely ready for it. In my mind, I said, okay, I'm definitely going to be married with a good woman before I bring children into the world. Because, raising children is not an easy task. But you compound that task by having a woman that you can't get along with. That's like a lifelong problem. So I don't have much advice for people who are already in that situation. But if you're not in that situation, I would say you need to be very disciplined when it comes to who you're having sex with. Because, worst case scenario, you can have a child with that person and have to deal with them for the rest of your life. Another thing that stuck out to me in this chapter was Nathan thinking that, okay, as I get farther up north, the racism is going to get better. Once I got old enough to really understand racism, it never occurred to me that racism would be better in different parts of the country. I knew it would be different, but I didn't think about it being better. Like white supremacy is a system that's just built into the way our country works. And you always have to keep that in mind when you're dealing with people, because they've been brought up in this white supremacist system. So things that seem normal to them, like their actions and attitudes, it's not gonna stand out to them that they're doing something wrong. It was interesting hearing him talk about when he had to threaten that guy he was working with, telling him, "Yo, I'm gonna fuck you up if you keep messing with me." And then the guy started crying, like just some harsh words, and that was enough to break him down. And that man knew he was being an asshole when he was working with Nathan, making the job difficult. But as soon as he stepped to him like a man with some aggressiveness, that broke him down. And I know there's an energy inside of us that this system doesn't want to see. And then when we do get fed up and we put that energy where it's supposed to go, then we will see some changes. But I also know you have to be very controlled when you do that as well. Brother Panic pointed something out that boxers get told this all the time. Like, don't fight the other man's fight. Fight's your fight. So if you're in the ring with somebody who's a brawler, you're supposed to box smart. Don't just go in there and trade blows with them, because that's what they want to do. I often feel like this system wants us to lash out physically, because that's something that they think that they can control. All right, they do this, we can put them in jail. But if you were to lash out at them with your spiritual powers, that's something that they don't know how to deal with. But anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. We're getting very close to the end of this book now. I'm excited to see how it ends. I've forgotten what happens at the end of this. But hit that link in the description. It'll take you to my ebook, Free Your Mind to Have Peace of Mind. And thank you guys again for tuning in. Share this with somebody that you think could, grow from this story. And I'll see y'all in the next chapter. Peace. All right, another thing, before I end it, I first read this book, I believe, when I was in middle school. I know I was living in Newport News, Virginia at the time. But I just had a discussion with my fiance is, when should this book be shared with black men or black boys? I think middle school is a perfect time, and maybe even a little bit before that. I know you don't want to go too young, but a young man going into middle school, I think this is a good story for them to hear, so they can avoid some of those pitfalls that a lot of our men fall into. They need to know about the type of things that can happen in prison. They need to know that there are always consequences to your choices. Even if you can't see those consequences, there's something there. So yeah, if you have any young men in your life, share this story with them. Either give them the book or direct them to my YouTube channel and let them listen. But it's also important that you sit down and you have a discussion with them as well about what they think about what they heard or what they read and what they're dealing with now. Because these kids with the internet, just the way the world is today, they're exposed to a lot more than what we were coming up. And something to think about is that the things that they're going to read about and hear in this story, the timeline that Nathan was coming up in, it really wasn't that long ago. If I was going to relate this to my nephew, I would tell him that, the man who wrote this book is the same age as your grandfather. They came out of high school in the same year. So these are, similar things that's going on. That's not too far away from you. But anyway, think about that when when you're thinking about who to share this with. Because a lot of times if we can, present these ideas to our young men and our young women, they need to hear this story as well. You can help them avoid a lot of the problems that can come about. Because we want to set our people up for success and not try to fix them after the problem has occurred. You want to give them the tools so they can make intelligent decisions. But all right, you guys, I'll talk to you next time. Peace.